Hello and welcome to the Behind the Beat podcast with me, Katie Russell from Planet Drum Music School in London. Join us as we talk to special guests and industry professionals about all things music. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to the Behind the Beat podcast with me, Katie Russell from the Planet Drum Music School in London. Today we are joined by one of the UK's top jazz drummers, Pete Cater, and we're very happy to have him on our podcast. So I will stop talking now and I'll let him introduce himself. Pete, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you first got into drumming.
Yeah, well, that's a very interesting place to start. And my situation is, it's not unique, but it's quite unusual. Because before we get to that, thank you so much for inviting me to contribute to this podcast this afternoon. I've been looking forward to this for quite some while. The thing that I like to emphasize right at the beginning is there is no time in my life, in all of my many years, that jazz drumming was not there. Okay, it's been there from day one. My dad played; he had good records, and it was the most, hearing, particularly the big drummer amongst the drummers of my dad's age group and kind of persuasion at that time was Joe Morello with the Dave Brubeck Quartet. He was the guy. He was to the drummers of that time. He had the same kind of popularity that in more recent generations has been afforded to musicians like Steve Gadd and Dave Beckel, a really big deal drummer who everybody followed. And my dad was a great admirer of Joe Morello. He had the Ludwig Super Classic drum set, the same as Joe, except in a different finish. It's down in my drum room now, because he handed it on to me when I was about 9 or 10 years old. And so it was the most natural thing. There were other drummers that I heard on records at that time, some Gene Krupa, a little bit of Sonny Payne, a little bit of Max Roach, a bit of Philly Joe Jones. Buddy Rich wasn't really on the scene at that time. So I'm talking the early 1960s, and Buddy was off in a long-term gig in Las Vegas with Harry James's band, and until he formed his own band and came over here and took everything by storm. And that didn't happen until I was about 4 or 5 years old. So I'd already had like several years of Joe Morello until my dad really went headline into Buddy and his big band. So Joe Morello was first, Buddy Rich was second, and there were drums around the house. My dad had this. I wish I still had it, just because it would make people laugh. It was just so random. This very slim bass drum, single tension, and a tiny little tom that was about 10 by 7 with no bottom head, probably from about the 20s or 30s, and a leftover tom from one of Dad's Ajax drum sets that he'd had in the 50s, and a very, very nasty snare drum made by a well-known British company, which you couldn't do anything with to make it sound good. And so he had this just like practicing, which he didn't have much time to practice, because at that time, as well as having a day job, he was gigging. I only really used to see him at weekends and in the daytime. All day Sunday. Sunday gigs were not that much of a thing back then. But he had a day job. He gigged almost every night of the week, and so there was this. He didn't have much time for practicing, but fortunately, he did have this practice drum set, which I very quickly discovered. And I started trying to copy the things I heard on the records. And I thought
what was your dad playing? What kind of gigs was he playing?
He was, again, like the guys of that generation who were born in the late 20s, early to mid 30s. He'd grown up with jazz and big bands as a teenager. And they were playing kind of what was defined back then, it has a very different meaning now, as dance music, or playing in clubs, like backing acts and things like that, or playing in restaurants. You have to remember, this was a time where I grew up in Lichfield, originally in Staffordshire. We then moved to Sutton Coldfield when I was 4. And all the big towns and cities all the way around the UK every hotel of any size at all had live music of some description. There were all the like civic halls, town halls. They all had events on all the time. And of course, in the Midlands, which was very heavily, you know, we had an industrial economy in the United Kingdom back then. And there were factories all around the Midlands, and every factory had a venue, you know, even small factories. So the amount of work, and then of course you had all the clubs, you know, the working men's clubs that were affiliated to trade unions or political parties. The amount of work for halfway good musicians back then, there was no end to it. You, as long as you got a decent quality set of drums and a way of getting yourself to the gig, you and a reasonable skill set, you could work. Not fully formed, you know. The general standard of playing back then wasn't anything like it is today. The knowledge that we have now is unprecedented, and it's really important that the younger drummers who are around today don't take that for granted.
Definitely.
It's very easy to do that. Just 1 second, guys. My wife.
That's right.
Just
I'm trying to get the audio on my.
It's a little audio icon in the left-hand corner.
Then it's obviously not working. I've hit it 100 times.
Maybe it's them. Leave the meeting and go in again.
I've already done that 4 times.
My wife is on a Zoom call. Sorry about that. My wife is on a Zoom call downstairs. Well, with her Mensa group. She's very clever. She's a member of Mensa. I am not.
Okay.
Wow.
Anyway, so this was how it was. This was the environment. This was the world that I came into in the early 1960s. And so whilst I think my mother and father would have far rather that I had followed a different career pathway like medicine or the law.
I was going to ask, actually, did your dad actually want you to play the drums? Or
I'm not sure he did. I'm not sure he did. There were I think there was always a mixed emotions surrounding that. He kind of did and he kind of didn't, because he knew what the industry was like.
Yeah.
And he hadn't had perhaps the kind of opportunities that I think as a young man, he would have liked to have gone to London and really got into the jazz scene in a big way, which I think with a bit of luck, he could have done very well at, but it didn't work out. And you know, I think he was kind of concerned that I might end up being similarly disappointed in adult life. And, you know, it kind of was tough. And this very bountiful local scene around the Midlands was in some ways a help and in some ways a hindrance, because it was an instant career. You know, once I got to a certain age, by the time I was 14, I was good enough to go out and handle a lot of these gigs.
Teach yourself? Did your dad teach you? Or because you said you were picking stuff up from records?
I've learned largely by listening and to a lesser extent watching. And he would occasionally show me things. There was never any kind of structured study at all. He would kind of show me a rudiment or an idea or something. And he gave me an old copy of the Gene Krupa drum method, which he said, like, go and look, and opened it at the page that showed the hand grips and said, like, that's, if you're going to play, that's the way you hold your sticks. So get on with it. And he just went back to watch the television. And in about 15 or 20 minutes, I got it. Is it this? I said, yeah, it is actually. But it was I think it was by and large a lot by osmosis. And of course, when I got to be old enough, I suppose around about 12 or 13, because I was very tall for my age. I looked a lot older than I was. So it wasn't a problem for me to go off on gigs with Dad into like licensed premises and places like that. They were a little bit stricter about things, that sort of thing, back in the 1970s. So I started hanging out with musicians who were like in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and really being part of their world. And it wasn't until probably about a year later that I got involved with the Midlands Youth Jazz Orchestra that I started to meet musicians my own age.
Yeah.
And of course, what was interesting was that the musician here, even within the confines of jazz, the musician heroes of my dad's peer group were often a slightly different list of names from the musicians my own age who they looked up to. And then, of course, there were all the guys at school who weren't musicians, and what drummers did they listen to? And it was Ian Pace, John Bonham. I mean, I found Ian Pace very early. He was the first rock drummer I really got into, and John Bonham shortly thereafter. So from all these different demographics who were coming in and out of my ever expanding horizon, I was getting a lot of influence from a lot of different places.
Yeah.
There was a guy, he ran the drum department of Yardley's music store in Birmingham, a guy called Mike Evans. Anybody who was around Birmingham at the time would remember Mike Evans. And Mike, he was the hippest. He knew all the best records, like Billy Cobham. He turned me on to Mike Clark with Herbie Hancock. Dad bought me Thrust when I was 11. The vinyl is here on the shelf behind me. And all this stuff. So lots of different people who were into a lot of different things. And I just kind of, you put a toe in here and there and find out what you like and find out what you don't like so much. And so there was a lot of jazz on the radio as well, which you may find that surprising. Not just the BBC, because by that time there were BBC local stations in pretty much every large city and major town, and the commercial radio network had opened up here by that point, and every one of those stations had at least one jazz show per week. So there was plenty of listening to be done. You know, we managed, we got by. Nobody had thought of YouTube or Spotify.
Yeah.
So there was plenty out there. The thing that was different, and again, this kind of accounts for a lot. The thing that was different was the non-availability of old records. You know, younger musicians started talking to me about Tony Williams, who I hadn't really found out about by then. And because I didn't know anybody in my immediate sphere of contacts who had those Columbia Miles Davis records from like 1962 to 1968 that Tony played on. The only things of his that I heard were much more recent, by which time this was the New Testament Tony Williams with the big yellow Gretsch drum set and a completely different sound and concept, and the
Lifetime,
and the CS heads on the toms got a completely different sound. And I thought, yeah, this is great, but you know, I'm not. Oh, okay, it's all right. And everybody's going, Tony Williams, you got to check out Tony. And there was an album, I remember the name of it, it's called The Joy of Flying, and it's a good record.
I got it, yeah.
But it's not that 17, 18, 19, 20-year-old Tony with Miles. And then when I found about that was, oh, okay. Oh, here we go.
Now I get it, yeah.
And then so I'm just giving a bit of context here, that because we didn't have this stuff a click away on YouTube or wherever, you had to go out and find these records. And sometimes that was more of a challenge than at other times.
Yeah.
And I eventually found a little record store in Birmingham where it was a specialist jazz shop. There was only one in the entire city of Birmingham. And they would have secondhand stuff. So I started with the bits of money that I was making from gigs for like one or two or £3. I started buying LPs and started filling a lot of gaps in my listening knowledge. So it was all very, as I say, it was all very kind of random and, you know, just finding your way. And that made it fun. It wasn't like being in college or anything like that. Because, you know, whilst I would love to have gone to college back then, there wasn't anywhere to go. You know, there was really only one jazz course as such that a drummer could maybe get on, which was at Leeds College. And I didn't have because I didn't have any piano skills or anything like that. I couldn't even have auditioned. So again, the opportunities now are not the same as the opportunities were then, which is not to say that, it was better back in the 70s or, it's better now. It was just different.
Yeah.
What you could do back then that I don't think you can do now is learn on the job. If you are halfway competent people will give you a shot at doing gigs because they needed drummers.
Yeah. So what would you say to some young drummers out there who want to get into maybe playing with big bands or getting into jazz, getting some gigs? Do you have any tips or advice for people like that?
The best thing you can do with anything, and you specifically cite jazz and big bands, but looking beyond the genres, the best thing you can do is go where people are playing that music and talk to the people who are doing it. And the other nice thing is, because we now have this medium of that online connection, with obviously in the slightly crazy year and a half we've just been through, has flourished. It's now possible. Somebody wants to have a Zoom call with me, and either like a practical lesson or to talk about things, then that's available too. You don't have to wait till I'm doing a gig in your part of the world to come and ask me stuff, or indeed any other players out there. If somebody you want to talk to, just find out if they're available to do like online coaching of any, as I say, whether that's actually instrumental skills or kind of musical knowledge or business strategy.
Yeah.
It just really, if you want to get involved in something, just go to where it's going on. That's the best thing. Okay. And this was why I, after a very kind of nomadic decade of my 20s, I'd kind of exhausted all the opportunities to play jazz in and around the Birmingham area. I'd played with all the good musicians who were there. I'd done all the best gigs, and to go further, I had to go to London. So that's what I did. I knew two people. I had two contacts: a bass player and a trumpet player who I've been working with on a couple of things over the year prior to moving to London, and an ex-student of mine who'd moved to London and had got himself quite well established. So I had three possible sources of work and no work. But all I had was, say, 3 phone numbers and a mortgage is what I had, because you could buy with a relatively small amount of money. You could put a deposit down on a property back then, which of course
it's not like that now.
No.
Oh dear. So what was it like to sort of be a big band drummer? What is expected of you?
I think the most important thing is the amount of the weight that you're carrying on your shoulders, the strength, the confidence, the fact that you've got bands vary in size, but I'd say on average you've got 15 people with you on the stage.
Yeah.
All of whom probably have a fractionally different idea of where the time is or where the time should be.
Yeah.
And it is incumbent upon you as the big band drummer to unify that and pull it all together, and to play in such a way that people have confidence in your time, and to play the groove and embellishments in order to facilitate the accurate placement of their notes. Because if you've got a chart with a load of figures on it, if you just play the same figures that everybody else is playing, that's you're only really doing half the job. What you've got to do is, as I say, embroider around it and in such a way, and it's very subtle. Most musicians don't even know that you're doing it, which I'll get to in a moment. And what you're putting out, it's almost subliminal rhythmic information you're playing that's telling the other musicians where to place the notes. And so the thing I was going to say in respect of that was the last day's work I did before everything locked down in March last year, was I was working for a big band leader called Nick Ross, and we were in Abbey Road making a record. And I've done lots of gigs with Nick's band, on and off over, I don't know, probably about 7 or 8 years now. And of course, everybody's in there and they've all got headphones on. And several of them said, "We can hear all the detail in what you're doing." And I said, "Well, it's always there. It's just so subtle. You don't get it, but you you get the effect of it, and it really is. It's what the ride's doing, the comping that's going on the left hand, probably playing more longer syncopated rhythmic phrases of the bass drum, and of course the constant 2 and 4 in the hi-hat, and it all kind of blends together in this. It's like a recipe. You've got to have the right amounts of everything.
Yeah.
Do you use a different kit for big band than if you play with a quartet?
No, I use at the moment, particularly just since summer, because after years of driving estate cars, I bought myself a very nice saloon car instead. And so I use 20 by 14 bass drum, 12 by 8 and 14 by 14 for everything that I do. With the same heads on. I just take them up or take them down according to what it is. The thing that changes is the cymbals and sometimes the snare drum.
Okay.
And if I'm playing pop music, which I do as well, people don't really, I don't think about me in that kind of context, but I do it. It's just not something that is really on anybody's radar. And I just the same coated ambassadors on the toms and the bass drum, just tuned down, and maybe one moon gel on each. It depends upon the acoustics of the room, and a little plastic damping ring on the snare drum. And it's just the same drums. As I say, cymbals different, and occasionally a change of snare drum.
Nice.
What about the challenge of running a big band nowadays, in today's economic climate? Because I remember, back because my dad used to listen to jazz as well, and there was a lot of big band gigs at the time, back in the 60s. Nowadays, you don't seem to see that many big bands playing around.
I don't know. I think in the run-up to the pandemic, there was probably about the same kind of consistent level of activity as there have been. And I work for a lot of big bands, from the bands that do the kind of traditional repertoire, the Glenn Miller, the Rat Pack kind of stuff, to things that are playing much more at the jazz end of the spectrum, which is I'm particularly pleased about at the moment. My great friend and colleague, tenor saxophonist Simon Spillett, has resurrected all the Tubby Hayes big band charts from the 1960s and early 70s, and he's put the most amazing band together. It's just full of British jazz A-listers, and he's coming in up with dates for that. Like, we've got lots of big festivals in for 2022.
Nice.
And every few days it seems like he's coming up with another gig or two. So from my point of view, I'm doing more big band playing than I have done for years. So I did go for a long while. The only big band playing I was doing was with my own band, and the thing about that is, we had quite a bit of profile with that. We started specializing after a decade of playing original music, most of which had been written for us. We then, because people asked me to do it, we then started specializing in playing Buddy Rich's repertoire, and we've got about 10 years out of that. And now I just got with a new agent in the summer, but just after the lockdown finished, which came completely out of the blue. I wasn't touting, I wasn't looking around for anything. I was perfectly happy with things the way they are, just to only take the gigs that I enjoy. And a new agent came along, so we are busy coming up with a new big band format, which is very much about the drums, but it's about all the great drumming within the whole spectrum of the history of big band music, and jazz in a broader sense, and funk and soul to a lesser extent. And I'm determined to get some Led Zeppelin into a big band context before I die. I'm determined to do that. So we have a new show in development, and
that's exciting.
Looking at hopefully getting that out there sometime next year. We might do a big launch. We might do a soft launch. I don't know. It's
okay.
in the post-COVID market, there's a lot of hesitancy out and around in some of the theatres around the country, because that's the natural environment for a show like the new thing that we've got coming through. So and I've just got an ever increasing list of great things that I think would be good to play. Because the thing about when I do a big band show with my own band, we never play the same show twice. Since I started that band in London in the beginning of 1995, we've never played the same program of music on 2 gigs. There's always something different.
Wow.
So, and it's just something you don't have to do that. You could play the same program time and time and time again, and lots of people do, or very near the same program time and time again. But I just like to keep changing things. But
you're creative,
definitely.
you like to create and change. That's the spirit of jazz, isn't it?
So every performance is different. It's not like going to a West End show, for example, where and as great as they are, it's exactly the same thing in the same place at the same time every night. Somebody did ask me about this is crazy. This never happened. It was somebody actually put it to me about taking the big band into one of the West End theatres and doing like a big band review show, which is just an insane idea. It's the great thought of doing that. But the guy said to me, I said, you're crazy. He said, actually, I'm not. It could happen. But the thing is, again, if we did do that, I would still change the show every day.
Yeah.
Or maybe if we were going to do that, I'd have like 14 set lists, and I'd just randomly pick one every day.
Mix them up, yeah.
Absolutely, because it's good for me, it's good for the musicians, and it's good for the audience as well. Because there's nothing worse than going and hearing something, where the performers on stage are just phoning it in. There's got to be some vitality. There's got to be something about this one-off relationship between these performers and this audience, who are a different set of people from yesterday's audience and the day before that, tomorrow's audience and next week's audience. I believe in maintaining that level of freshness and to a degree spontaneity about what you do, even if it's all very, very slick and impeccably rehearsed. Just having elements that are fluid in the context of a performance is always going to me, I can't imagine doing it in any other way.
I love that. I think everyone can take that sort of, across all genres. I think that's really amazing. We're actually running out of time, but I do have another question for you. So what has been your most memorable either gig or band to play with, or one of the most? I'm sure you've got loads and loads, but is there anything that stands out for a particular reason?
That would take a whole another podcast.
I'm sure.
I can give you a list, and then I'll explain why. Just talking about Simon Spillett, who's doing the Tubby Hayes Big Band repertoire. We did a gig on Wednesday, October the 20th at the 100 Club in Oxford Street. That was one of the most gratifying, satisfying gigs I've done in years. I have a project with 3 really good musicians, and we do all the Dave Brubeck repertoire from that classic era of the Time Out album. One particular gig we did with that at the back in Cleo Lane's back garden at the stables. That was in mid-June 2015. A Sunday afternoon show that I played in a fabulous auditorium called Muzark Hall, which is about 40 kilometers outside of Tokyo, with the Glenn Miller Orchestra in 1997. It was early November 1997 on Sunday afternoon. Why am I picking out these dates? Why am I so specific about these gigs? Because they are. I mean, how many gigs have I done? I've been gigging since 1977, so it's a lot.
I mean, it's a very difficult question to answer.
Well, yeah. So let me kind of take your question and kind of improvise the subject matter and be like a politician in a way. So you're asking me a question, and I'm answering another one.
I like it.
Here's something that everybody can take away from this podcast. There are those occasions, and I just cited a few of them. There are a few more that have come by over, as I say, this long 40-odd year playing career, when I've played absolutely the best drums that I and maybe anybody else could have done in that circumstance. And I remember those gigs over this 40-year career. That probably hasn't happened more than 10 times. Oh, Pavilion Theatre Worthing, the first Saturday of June 2010. That was with my own band. That was another one. And I remember those times when you've absolutely done everything that you could have done and you couldn't have done anything better. And they're not, there's probably like 1 in 1,000 gigs you hit that level.
Yeah.
And I remember what that feels like. And every time I go to play, and very often when I go to practice as well, which is what I'll be doing. I've just come from the gym. I've become very much a creature of habit. Gym in the morning, practice in the afternoon, and a bit of share trading because it pays better than gigs. Anyway, be that as it may. So every time I go to play, I try to remember that feeling of those gigs when you know you've absolutely knocked it out of the park and I've been the best Pete Cater it's possible for me to be. And everybody needs to know what this feels like and to be able to, again, trying to get a hand into the shot here, to be able to hold on to that and try to take it with you everywhere, every time you go to play. 999 times out of 1,000, it's not going to happen. But when it does, remember it and put it somewhere safe.
Hold on to that.
Every time you go to play, just remember how good it feels when you're on the top of your game. And when you're feeling demotivated about practicing, I know so many people really, really struggled with that during the pandemic.
Yeah.
I didn't. I was there every day. Every day I was downstairs in my drum room, playing, writing new ideas. I just published a book before the pandemic, and I actually sat and started working on some of my own material and realized there was way, way more to it than I've been aware of when I wrote the book.
Yeah.
Is that a drum book, like a teaching book?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, I did a DVD in 2017, and the drum book I was actually preparing in the months prior to the whole COVID thing kicking off. And it came in handy because I was able to sell some books when there were no gigs around. So
you have to send us the link and we'll share it.
I'm sorry?
You have to send us where we can find your book, and we'll share it. We'll put it on the podcast.
It's all on my website, which is www.petecater.org.
Amazing. We'll make sure to put that in the link down below.
Oh, please do.
Go have a look at that. Definitely. So we're actually going to run out of time, but I just want to. We could talk for hours about this, which is a bit of a shame. But
well, anytime you want to do a part 2, I'm always happy for a rematch.
I'm down for that. I think we'll get a part 2 in soon.
Yeah.
I feel like we haven't even scratched the surface, but we're running out of time. But I just want to say thank you so much for joining us on our podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure, and hopefully we'll get you in for a part 2 so we can learn a bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. And as long as I can go to do a bit of trading in the morning, and then go to the gym. And
we'll work it to suit you. Don't worry.
Thanks very much, Peter. It was great to meet you finally and hear your stories. I can really relate to that, and it's great to have you.
Well, it's a very ordinary fact. I didn't come from money or privilege or connections. And it's really important for people out there who see a lot of that. You don't have to go to a top London conservatoire. Your dad doesn't have to be the orchestral contractor for a television station or something like that, or whatever. You can get where you need to go without those kind of music industry silver spoons. But just stay focused and keep pushing and stay in for the long haul and keep positive. And if you're feeling down, watch this podcast over again, or send me a message on Facebook and I'll cheer you up.
I like that.
All right.
All right, take